Power Talks, empowering you through the voice of truth with your host, Dr. Joel Hunter.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Joel Hunter, host of Power Talks, empowering you through the voice of truth. On today's program, Barry Friedman, who's the Senior Director of the Advent Health Transplant Institute, David Collis, the President of Advent Health Foundation, and John Allen, an actual heart transplant recipient. I've never met one of these before. We'll share about the amazing ways medical science and modern technology are giving us to serve those in crisis, and we'll learn how we can help. Thanks for being here today, y'all. Barry, I want to start with you. How did you get to be a part of the Transplant Institute, and what was that calling on your life?
So my background has always been in organ transplantation. I've been in healthcare since 1984. I was at the bedside taking care of heart and lung transplant recipients. And one day I decided, where do these organs come from? And I decided at that point I needed to learn and work with families in crisis that were going to give the gift of life, organ donation. So I did that for about 6 years. And then I switched over and went back to the clinical side and took care of pediatric patients that needed transplantation. Wow. I've been this in my entire career, and probably the important part for me was I didn't understand the administrative part of it. Yeah. And this is where I felt I could bring my talent best to Orlando, was Advent Health, because we have a wonderful transplant program. A lot of people in Central Florida or across the country come here for their organ transplants.
It's unusual for a practitioner to actually go toward administration. That's an unusual transition. But let's go back to, and I'm coming to you guys directly, but let's go back to, you said you helped people with donation. What type of person donates organs to another person, and what's the process of that?
So when a person dies, there's when you have brain death. When the brain dies, that is what considered death in the United States. And it's a very special circumstance, usually head trauma, car accidents, unfortunately gunshot wounds to the head. And it's a requirement of every hospital that we approach families. And it doesn't matter how rich, how poor, where your background is, we make those approaches to those families. And it's something for them to consider, to take a tragedy and turn it into something of kindness, to where you can help somebody.
Yeah, but it's helpful to have that conversation before the crisis.
Correct. Right? And every state, when you go to the Driver's License Bureau, that's a question we ask. But even if you don't have a driver's license, there's a website where you can make a decision, you as an individual, to be an organ donor, and we respect that decision. The important part, though, is that you let your legal next of kin know, your wife, your brother, your sister, that you made that decision to be an organ donor.
Let me ask, but there are living donors as well.
You're right. So patients that have kidney or liver transplants, there's the option where a family member or a friend can donate an organ, and that's more predictable. When God created us, He did a pretty good job, and we have 2 kidneys, and you can donate a kidney, or if a person can donate a piece of their liver to help a child or another adult, we've perfected that technique.
Yeah. David, let me ask you this. You're kind of the head of the foundation. You fund this deal. Tell us about what is the big picture of funding a critical program like this. But it requires, I imagine, quite a financial investment. Where does the money go, and where does the money come from, and if somebody's kind of wanting to donate, how do they do that?
Right. Yeah, there's nothing more life-changing than a transplant. It really is a gift of life. And so what we do at the foundation is we talk to people that are recipients, that have family or friends that have been affected by a transplant, who want to give back and help somebody in their greatest time of need. And what's exciting is that they give back because they want to help somebody else, and they do that out of the kindness of their heart. we fund a lot of patient assistance, so it is an expensive process to go through a transplant. The cost of medications, we even built a transplant house and raised over $5 million from the community to build a 24-bed Barch transplant house. That allows patients to stay during their treatment phase at a very low cost. And I think that's pretty critical to people to have a place to congregate. It's not just the patients, it's their families also that come. And so I think there's an outpouring of support for this. And it's really easy to see somebody whose life's been saved by a transplant and realize why it's important to get involved in something like that.
So everybody's looking at John now, and we're going to come to John, who is an engineer with a personality. This guy, he's such a delight to talk to. And John, we just need to hear your story. And there are two things especially that we want to hear from you. You can give us the short version of how this happened, how you came to the place where you needed this transplant, and then how your life is different afterwards than it was before, what your perspective is like afterwards than it was before. So just tell us.
Well, let me start with the second question first. And it centers on a lot of the things that we've been hearing so far. You'd said that I was the first person with a heart that you'd met, with a heart transplant that you'd met. A lot of my friends now have heart transplants, and I know a lot of people that have had them. And there's a reunion on April 7th at the hospital for organ transplant people, and I'll be there. I do a lot of things to support the hospital and support the organization. But imagine being in bed for 2 months after waiting for almost a year for a heart transplant. And doctor comes into the room and says, "John, we have a heart for you." And at that point, I knew I was going to live. And I came from death's doorstep. I was very sick. I was in a coma for almost a month. Of course, I don't remember any of it. And Advent Hospital saved my life more than once. But imagine when a doctor comes into the room and says, "John, we have a heart for you." I knew I would live, but I had mixed feelings at that time because I knew that at that moment, someone that day had lost a life. And the family had been gracious and generous enough to donate an organ to keep me alive and gave me the opportunity to be here. So, you know, how's my life different? First of all, I have one. And secondly, there's not a day or an hour that goes by that I don't think of the donor, the fact that I'm here, and I live a grateful life. And I do everything I can to take care of the heart that's within me. And it's very different being alive, knowing full well that I'm only here because of the generosity of someone else.
Wow.
And I eat well, I take care of my heart. I walk 2.5 miles in the morning, I walk a mile at night. I maintain my mental, physical, and my spiritual health in honor of the donor.
That's so
that provided me with life.
A logical question, John, is do you keep in touch with the donor's family, or is that usual? I mean, how does that work?
You have to wait a year.
Okay.
And then you can write a letter.
Okay.
To the donor family, and it goes through the hospital, and the hospital takes care of it through the social worker at the hospital. And I've written a letter. I've had this heart now for 17 months.
Okay.
And I've written the letter, and I haven't heard back from the family. But whether I do or not doesn't matter. I mean, I know something about that organ donor.
Yeah.
And I know that I don't know much about his life, but I know that in death, he was a gracious and generous man to provide me with the opportunity for life.
Yeah. It really does make for a different life when you live out of gratitude rather than just dealing with everyday's problems and looking for solutions, immediate solutions. Barry, let me come back to you. You have been at the bedside of many of these patients. You've dealt with their families. What are the dynamics of somebody in that kind of crisis, and how did you lend your support when you were there?
So, as a person, and we as healthcare providers are people as well, it's getting that humanistic connection, finding what it is that patient and their family need to help cope. It may be as very simple as allowing the patient to get out and go outside and walk outside. It may be making a phone call to a person that they may have had an argument with. But what's interesting in Advent Health is how we're able to connect people and find that out. We try to encourage that. John, when he was in the hospital, was very sick, yet our staff kept him as a person. He wasn't a patient.
Right.
He was a person.
Right.
The same thing with organ donor families. It's at that crisis moment when 3 o'clock in the morning you get that phone call and your loved one, your child's been in a car accident, hit by a drunk driver. There's no reason for it. But finding the strength and conviction to say, when someone approaches them, a trauma surgeon, a neurosurgeon, to say, you have the opportunity to give the gift of life, and people think about it.
Yeah.
And in John's situation, where the family doesn't communicate, I've had families that donated organs that have said, I just needed to know my loved one helped somebody else.
Yeah.
I don't need to be able to make that other connection.
Yeah, I get that.
And some families, it's like they want that connection. They need it.
Yeah, yeah. David, when you take a look at the big picture of this program, where would you like to see it go in the future? What are the future plans for the program itself?
Well, I mean, right now the program's conducting over 300 transplants a year.
Wow.
And I think they're on track to grow that significantly.
Can I ask, what are the different, I mean, could you give us different, which organs,
Probably liver is the longest standing program that we've had.
Well, kidney
Kidney,
actually,
sorry,
yeah.
kidney, you're correct.
So we do about 150 kidneys a year. We do about 10 kidney pancreas transplants for diabetics. We do about 55 hearts a year. We're in the top 10 in the United States for doing heart transplants. We do 70 to 80 liver transplants, and we do about 25 to 30 lung transplants per year. And we do multi-organ transplants, so hearts and kidneys, hearts and livers, which is very unique. There's only about 40 centers in the United States that do that.
There was a heart and lung as well.
Yeah, heart, lung.
Yeah, and the qualification, how do you choose who gets these?
So it's a very rigorous process because we want to make sure that the patient physically can take that new organ because the organ is so precious. So we have to be good stewards of those organs. They have to actually be in pretty good health to be able to receive that. So it's hard to be able to say someone that's in a coma. So we do a lot of medical tests. We make sure that they're cancer-free. We make sure if they're going to get a kidney transplant that their heart is functioning well. Gotcha. So each organ is very specific, and we work very closely with the families to do that.
Gotcha. Okay.
And the patient.
David, I interrupted you. I'm sorry.
No, this was a good conversation here. So when we first started our heart transplant program, we needed to provide 10 free heart transplants at the onset to get our to get approval to do these. Foundation was really instrumental in doing that, and we talk about the concept that generosity heals. Not only heals the person who's giving the donation, but it helps heal the patient.
Wow,
and so I think the future for us in fundraising is really, as we grow the program, provide that patient assistance dollars. We'll probably need to raise about $150,000 to $200,000 to help those patients. That helps them focus on healing and not worrying about the financial side of medicine. Keeping the transplant house going is important because it provides affordable location. Some patients are doing 40 visits a year with their physicians in that first year, and so it takes the strain off of them having to pay for a hotel when they can stay at the house. And creating that environment at the Barch Transplant House is critical too, where patients and families get to intermingle, and there's almost a community that's been built there at the Barch Transplant House, which I think is really important for social support.
Yeah.
And so the foundation helps do all those things.
I spent last night at the Barch House, and I spoke with a young woman that's waiting for lungs and frightened, and I just, but when I show up and people look at me and see that I'm healthy, it makes them feel better.
Yeah.
And there's a kitchen there, and everyone's community cooking and sharing stories. There are several people that were there a little over a year ago when I was transplanted, and I waited for quite some period of time at the Barge House. And I like to go in there. I like interacting with the people that are waiting. And some of them these are difficult stories for people. A lot of people, when they're waiting, they're frightened, their families are frightened, and I can't imagine staying in a hotel as opposed to staying at the Barge House, where there are people that you can share stories with.
You know, I spent almost 50 years as a pastor, and I've been in a lot of emergency rooms with parishioners, and that's what I remember about the emergency rooms. You know, you only have to be there, a day, and everybody's community. That's what crisis does. Everybody is community. John, let me ask you this. I imagine you give a lot of talks. If not, you should, because you just you exude optimism and hope, and when people listen, they're thinking about people in crisis who are in difficult situations. They're in crisis. What would you tell them gives other people encouragement? I mean, how do you do that? How do you communicate to people, hang in there, because there is hope? What would you say to them?
Well, I do talk quite a bit about organ donation. When you were speaking, I just reminded me, I got pulled over by the police because the registration on my car had expired, and I ended up having the policeman there for 10 minutes explaining to him all about heart transplant and what had happened to me.
That's great.
But over the course of a year, when I went from a coma to a rehabilitation facility because I couldn't walk, I was in a wheelchair, and I'm as fit as can be now. I remember being wheeled outside in a wheelchair, and the sun hit me in the face, and I started to weep. I couldn't stop. Like a child is gasping for air, and I was weeping, and I couldn't stop. And the woman that was pushing the wheelchair, as a matter of fact, I'm going to her house this evening for dinner, and to see her newborn baby. But she put her hands on my shoulder, and I knew I'd come so close to not living, and my life had been saved. And and I committed to myself that I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do it well, and I'm going to do what it takes to get through this. And I had no idea where it was going to go. I live completely in the moment. There's so many things that people worry about now that I don't pay any attention to. I didn't turn the television on for a year. Well, I watched the Red Sox and the Patriots.
No, the Red Sox. I'm thinking those Red Sox don't play the Patriots, but you're talking about two different sports. Go ahead.
I watched sports. I read books. When I came out of a coma, my fingers were kind of locked into position, and they said, "We'd like you to get a rubber ball and squeeze the ball." I said, "I don't want that." I got myself a guitar, and I practiced playing the guitar.
Good for you.
I lived in the moment.
Yeah.
And my job was to stay alive one more day, and that was it. And the nurses and the people at the hospital were just phenomenal. They were so wonderful to me. I have this hat that I brought. It's from the nurses gave this to me. It stands for Ginsburg Tower, the 5th floor. That's where I was. And I hope the folks that were there get to see the hat on television.
Good.
But I really lived in the moment. And I prayed to stay alive one more day. That's all I wanted. But I see people worrying about things, and I listen to it, and say, that doesn't mean anything.
Puts everything in perspective.
It does put things in perspective. I live a grateful life. The nurses asked me to participate in the Heart Walk, and I did that. But these are people that work 12 hours a day. And then on Saturday, they show up at the Heart Walk for people like me. And they're at the Heart Walk in Orlando. They give their time. So why can't I?
Absolutely. Barry, let me come back to you, though, because something John was talking about just reminded me. Again, you have such rich experience at the bedside of patients. And I know that the people listening always worry about going to visit somebody. I don't want to say the wrong thing. Should I talk about it? Should I avoid it? Should I not? Give us some hints about being at the bedside of somebody who is sick or scared, or is it good to talk about what they're going through? Is it good to talk about the Red Sox? I mean, what do you do?
You know, everybody's an individual, Joel, and certainly just having the comfort of having conversation at the bedside. As John said, whether you're hooked up to a ventilator, to equipment, human touch, being able to be spoken to, even if you cannot communicate back to them. Maybe it's a tapping of a finger saying, you know, I'm there for you. People in crisis at the bedside, it's amazing. You know, as a family, you have your disagreements among each other, but at that moment, when someone is sick, being there for them is important, and trying to comfort is important. It's also important for the staff for us to be able to see that, to see people at the bedside helping them. We have people from all over the United States that come here for organ transplants. Some are lucky they can bring their family with them, some aren't. At the Barch Transplant House, for example, people will come in and donate dinner for these people, and complete strangers coming in, and to be able to sit down and have a meal with someone, have a cup of coffee with someone, just to talk about whether it's the Red Sox or the Cardinals. That's certainly an act of kindness that's needed.
David, let's go back to the folks who may think, you know, I'd like to get involved financially.
Right.
I've been blessed with either good health, or I've been through crisis myself, and I identify with these people. And I want to be able to do something. Are there different venues or different avenues that people can
there's so many different ways to get involved. You can go to our website at AdventHealthFoundationCentralFlorida.com, and there's ways to get involved online. What people don't realize is we get about 9,000 donations just from employees. Employees believe so much in the mission, they're giving out of their paychecks. Overall, 16,000 people in Central Florida are making donations to support extending the healing ministry of Christ at Advent Health. And so those gifts, the majority of them are under $100. So they add up, and so you can give at any level and get involved. And the Barch Transplant House really relies on gifts like this in order to create that community for whole person care, which is mind, body, and spirit. We know the surgical expertise, but there is that spiritual side that needs to be nurtured, and you're helping support patients' recovery. So I think there's a lot of ways to get involved, and know that a gift at any level makes a huge difference in extending the mission of the hospital and the community.
That's really good to know. John, when you were going through this, who were some of the most encouraging people for you? Who were the people you were glad to see walk in the room, and because you knew you'd feel better after they were there?
When I came out of a coma, the first person that I saw was my ex-wife and my son, and she's now my best friend, and she was there to support me. And I was, you know, I was bearded, I was thin, I had tubes in me, I had no idea where I was, and she was there to support me. And my son, he was up in New England, and he came down and stayed with me the whole time that I needed help. There were people over it, and my sister was living in Alabama at the time, and she came over, and she was here whenever I need her. When I was in my sister Lucille, when I was in the rehab facility in a wheelchair, she came over and put me in the wheelchair and took me out to eat, took me to the grocery store. There was another friend of mine from high school that came over to visit, Tom Hamilton. He came to see me. And there were just a lot of people that came out. And it was just, so many people came to visit and to help. And, you know, I've got a lot of friends now that are part of the transplant community. Yeah. And I just can't say enough about all the people that have helped me.
Yeah.
It's been wonderful.
Yeah. I don't think we realize This program, as I said to you, is all about people with power who help people without power. And I don't think people who do have their health, at least presently, realize how important it is just to be with people who are going through a time of vulnerability and weakness, just to be with them. I just think this is something that's very important for us to remember.
The spiritual part of Advent Health is important. The cleaning woman came in and prayed. She was supportive while I was in there, and it's just amazing. She'd come in, do whatever she was doing. We would have a nice chat, and I looked forward to seeing her. She was wonderful. And before, when the doctor came in, Dr. Silvestri came in and said, "John, we have a heart for you," and I did go through that feeling of mixed emotion. And all the nurses came in before I was wheeled down to surgery. There must have been 10 nurses from the floor. It was in the middle of the night. A lot of nurses came in, and we held hands and we prayed for me and for the donor. And it's just, that doesn't happen in very many places, that level of support. It's
we were talking before about how important it is to attach competence to mission, a sense of purpose. And I'm a huge fan of Advent Health because everyone I talk to there has this sense that we're here for not just to provide a service, not just to make things incrementally better on a practical level, but to be about this bigger purpose, the one that we've been given from beyond ourselves, and the one that all of us have in common. And so I love the extending the healing ministry of Christ. I love that. And I love that each person in that organization really exudes that. So we're out of time. I hate this because this is fascinating to me and very gratifying to know that people like John are being well taken care of. And I want you to know how you can be of help as well. So thank you for Barry and David and John for being here. Remember, these discussions are just that. They're discussions among us. But we'd love to see you continue the discussions at home and go one step further. Get involved. Because when power talks, you're empowered through the voice of truth. See you next time.
You just watched Power Talks, a Good Life 45 original production that makes you part of our Hope Team here on Good Life 45, where hope happens.